Hello, everybody. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. We have a good one for you, as always. Thank you so much for joining us, and I do apologize. There's going to be a bit of the background noise because it is incredibly hot here in America at the moment. So we're just going to have to hopefully deal with a little bit of it. Won't be too bad. On tonight's show, we are going through everything to do with Israel, including a big new report about the IDF knowing of Hamas's plan to kidnap 250 people before the October 7th attack. A document shows that they pretty much knew every detail of this attack, but still took no action. We'll break that down for you. And also, another big new tit for tat, kind of back and forth situation. The White House is apparently responding in bafflement, and I think a lot of people will be as well, to the claim that Israel has not been receiving enough weapons from the U.S., because that's what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say today in Israel. We'll also have a great and very interesting new documentary out that's coming out from Zeteo, the news organization, the brand new news organization started by Mehdi Hassan, that really goes inside of Israel. Meanwhile, we have a big report, multiple stories going on in immigration as Biden gives legal protections to undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens. There are a majority of people who now say, including Hispanics, now favor mass deportation. And we'll finish it off with Trump beefing with Milwaukee in a general look at all things Wisconsin, which is probably going to be one of the most critical points of this upcoming election. It's going to be a very, very big deal. But first, we start with some of the general updates here. And really, Hezbollah, of course, of all things, Israel and Gaza, I should clarify, before we get into some of our more specific stuff. And it really does center around Hezbollah a lot today, as Hezbollah's release of this drone footage, where essentially they fly over and they released this 9-minute video of their reconnaissance drone, which is way high up in the sky, went completely undetected over one of Israel's most critical ports, and kind of documented all the important stuff for all the world to see, which was a big embarrassing situation for them. An analyst says that the most significant front to Al Jazeera, Menachem Klein, Israel professor of political science at Bar Ilan University. It makes sense that he's Israeli, because he's saying here the main war front has moved from Gaza to southern Lebanon. With the amount of people that are dying in Gaza, I still wouldn't say that it is something that should be cast aside. I don't know if he's trying to say that, but it kind of sounds like he's kind of saying, it's not a really big deal anymore. We can kind of just move on. It's not going to be, the end of the world. We just got to focus on Lebanon now, because I'm sure, Israel wants to focus on Lebanon. They've said that, Benjamin Netanyahu especially wants to come in and finish this war. He wants to keep things going here. So, it's not going to be something that he's going to want to turn down, especially when Hezbollah is presenting and showing themselves to be such a big threat. But I think, the attention should very much still be primarily on Gaza at this point, with the incredible amount of people that are dying. The war on that front is perceived by some in Israel as one where Hezbollah is holding 50,000 hostages, Israeli residents of the north who cannot return to their homes there. Again, they are living in complete peace and comfort, especially compared to the Israeli captives that were taken by Hamas into Gaza. So it's kind of a laughable thing to say. Hezbollah's alliance with Iran is now a major strategic threat that Israel will one day have to confront, if not now, he added. However, Klein believes the Israeli administration's tactic of using more and more force must change. Israel must change its strategic thinking to think on all political solutions rather than using force. So it's, again, something that, as they approve, as they approve a new offensive plan, it doesn't seem, a reduction in force does not seem very likely at all from Israel, because that is just, not consistent. Prior performance is oftentimes the best indicator of future results. So I think you can see that again here with Israel quite clearly. Meanwhile, on the U.S. side, the pier, we're seeing some kind of mixed reports on this pier. The U.S. Central Command has said that it'll be temporarily, after it's been removed to the port of Ashdod in Israel. They, after putting it back for this invasion, essentially, which is what it was, for this hostage rescue, the Nusrat refugee camp massacre that killed 300 people, they put the aid back for that. Still, basically no aid has been delivered off of this stupid pier. Now they've had to move it again because of high waters, and they're saying it's going to be operational again this week. But the New York Times saying they've towed it again. They may not bring it back, so it's going to be something to watch really, really carefully. It's this farce of this humanitarian aid pier, which is, again, most likely been used for real, just disastrous operation into not into Rafah, but into the refugee camp there. That 274 Nusrat refugee camp dead in that camp to rescue the hostages. Like, it was a brutal operation, and that's pretty much the biggest thing that it's been used for. Some other good news: the Qatari Prime Minister has met with senior Hamas officials. This is as they continue to try and mediate a deal, so it's likely now that they're kind of conferring, seeing Hamas is going to give their response to the deal that Qatar is going to present to them. They're trying to work something out here on the ceasefire side of things as Qatar continues to serve as the mediators. Again, on these plans for a ground offensive into Lebanon, they have apparently been approved and validated by the Israeli military. As part of the assessment of the situation, operational plans for the attack in Lebanon were approved and implemented, and decisions were made to continue accelerating the readiness of forces in the field. The United States military has been desperately trying to tamp this stuff down because Israel is really doing this for political purposes. Netanyahu is doing this for political purposes. It's not something that I don't think a lot of Israelis want, although more and more are, as they kind of buy into the propaganda of this Hezbollah threat needs to be eliminated, and they just have this continually high image of themselves that even U.S. intelligence, look at the New York Times today, even U.S. intelligence is like, they cannot back this up. It's going to be a real disaster for them. And of course, because they're our spoiled child on the world stage, they're going to pull us into it as well, and it's going to be really disastrous. So Patrick Ryder, a spokesperson, said for the Pentagon, said, "I'm not going to get into hypotheticals and speculate on what would happen, but no one wants to see a wider regional war." Well, Israel clearly does want to see a wider regional war. Amos Hochstein was in Lebanon today trying to seek urgent de-escalation after meeting with Israeli leaders just the day before. Apparently a ship manager, apparently according to the Washington Post, they're close to achieving, their goals in Rafah, in the southern Gaza city, weeks after it began its military operation there against the wishes of its major allies. Again, that didn't break any red lines, and apparently they're almost done. So again, it's something that we will see. Senior Israeli military officials familiar with the ground operations are saying, our aim is now to defeat the Rafah brigade, and we are now doing that. So, it doesn't really seem to be that way as we continue, more of these red triangle videos coming out. And then on the Hezbollah side, that really eye-catching, shall we say, reconnaissance drone video is definitely showing the Israeli army to be under some continuous pressure. And it is very interesting that they're kind of setting this out. They're leaking this to the Washington Post on the Israeli side because it could mean that they're, of course, attempting to lay the groundwork, set the precedent for then turning the tide into southern Lebanon, which is something that they definitely seem like they want to do as the war in Gaza continues to go more poorly for them. But it really makes you wonder, if they can't handle Hamas, everyone and their mother says that Hezbollah is way more powerful. So I really just don't know what they're thinking there. A lot of kind of confusing signals coming out of Israel at the moment as they have Hezbollah continues to target military factories in Israel, including, speaking of kind of pretty conflicting signals. This is from Barak Ravid. The White House is bluntly responding today to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his claim the Biden administration is withholding weapons from Israel. We genuinely do not know what he is talking about, they say. Why it matters, Netanyahu's remarks made on the video in English were some of his harshest public criticisms of the Biden administration since the war began in October 7th. After October 7th, they came despite the fact the U.S. has only withheld one weapon shipments since the war began, while providing billions worth of arms and ammunition. Again, they would really be in an incredible amount of trouble if it hadn't been for us. The shipment was put in hold back in May to signal U.S. concerns over a looming Israeli ground operation in Rafah, which included 3,500 bombs for fighter jets, many of which were the 2,000-pound 2,000-pound bombs that we've continued to see Israel drop pretty wantonly. So here are some of here's some of what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say to Joe Biden. And it is really remarkable here because this amounts to essentially a direct attack, saying that of all the things that you could possibly say, the U.S. has not given Israel enough weapons. And this is a country that's purportedly a top weapons producer. It's purportedly one of the things they do best. And out of all the billions and billions of dollars in arms and any sort of military equipment they could possibly want, they get no questions asked from the U.S. And still, this is what Netanyahu had to say.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, "Give us the tools, we'll do the job." And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster. When Secretary Blinken was recently...
So they just repeated, but yeah, so a really kind of a crazy situation. I mean, maybe they're withholding something that we don't know about, but it does not seem that way because according to Axios and Barack Ravid, who essentially has probably the most direct line to the White House right now out of any reporter, Blinken responded to Netanyahu's comments during a press conference with Jens Stoltenberg of NATO, but declined to say whether Netanyahu would characterize their conversation accurately. He said, "We will continue to review one shipment that President Biden talked about regarding 2,000-pound bombs because of our concern about their use in densely populated areas like Rafah. That remains under review, but everything else is moving as it normally would to make sure Israel has what it needs to defend itself against a multiplicity of threats," saying, but the Biden administration, though, is kind of, anonymously saying that we do not know, genuinely do not know what he is talking about there. So it's pretty telling that they still, it just shows you a country that is fundamentally the definition of a client state. It's just a completely spoiled, client state that increasingly does not serve any purpose or any benefit to the United States. And you see Mitch McConnell now piling on the Biden administration and saying, yeah, why aren't you sending Israel these weapons? It's inconceivable, just like Netanyahu said, it's inconceivable that you would try and stop Israel from doing what they came here to do, from finishing the job. So that is a really remarkable thing. I saw something about a sign-off on potentially sending more weapons over the weekend from a top congressional aide, but from what I understand, it is that only that 2,000, it wasn't that 2,000-pound weapon shipment, which is a very, very small 2,000-pound, as in the 2,000-pound bombs weapon shipment, which is a very, very small percentage of the overall weapon shipment. That is the only thing that has been held up, according to any other reports. Compared to what Netanyahu is saying, he's acting like there's more, which there clearly isn't. But he apparently seems to have a bit of a bee in his bonnet about those 2,000-pound bombs for the fighter jets that we talked about, 3,500 of them to be precise. Meanwhile, a really crazy situation that I'm seeing getting absolutely no play around the kind of U.S. media side of things. This is from the Jerusalem Post. A newly surfaced document reveals essentially that the IDF was pretty well aware of really well aware, down to the number of hostages that Hamas said they would take on October 7th, about the plan just weeks before the October 7th massacre of Hamas's plan to commit it. The document, which was compiled in the Gaza division, outlined Hamas's intentions and was known to top intelligence officials, according to a report by Khan News, which is essentially the PBS or whatever, the public broadcaster of Israel. The document, titled Detailed End-to-End Raid Training, was distributed on September 19th, 2023, less than 3 weeks before the attack, and described in detail in the series of exercises conducted by Hamas's elite units. The exercises including raiding military posts and kibbutzim, collective communities there in Israel, as we well know by now, kidnapping soldiers and civilians, and maintaining the hostages once they were in the Gaza Strip. So it was really, really detailed stuff. The IDF had precise information about Hamas's intentions, but due to prevailing consensus deceptions within the security establishment and possible negligence by senior officials. Warning signs were not acted upon. The report detailed Hamas two Israeli intelligence officials the steps Hamas planned to take after breaching Israeli territory and taking over military post. Expect a number of hostages, 200 to 250 people, pretty much dead on the range that Hamas actually ended up taking. Israeli intelligence officials who monitored the exercise detailed in the document the next steps after breaching into Israel and taking over the post, determining that the instruction is to hand over the captured soldiers to the company commanders. The expected number of hostages, again, is 200 to 250 people. That's a direct quote there from Khan News. Or Can News, whatever. The General Staff investigation is expected to present initial findings from the failure to the Chief of Staff in the coming weeks. The country seeks to understand how such a lapse in security could occur despite having detailed advanced knowledge of the enemy's plan. So really interesting stuff there. And if I were an Israeli right now, I would be pretty furious because it's like we saw something. There was a similar situation with the, it seems. The motivation behind this and also the motivation behind a very similar situation is in 9/11 was just the belief that, these guys could never pull off an attack of this magnitude because remember the memos that are passed around like Bin Laden determined to strike inside the United States, which, George Bush has asked about that in August, right before September 11th. And that's where the famous Watch This Drive clip comes from. And then this, I would say, is much more detailed. They knew down to the way they would treat the hostages. They had, detailed instructions essentially in their hands. And what is really kind of remarkable is, according to this Khan News report, that the Nova Festival, where some of the worst massacres happened, they originally wanted to go just through October 6th. They petitioned the government to go longer, and the government had this document, and they're like, sure, go ahead. Which really just does show you, it's we can't really say there's any kind of ill content in their decisions here, or malevolence going on, some kind of underhandedness, but just a pure, incredible amount of kind of almost this kind of racist hubris, I guess, against the Palestinians to say, they would never be capable of doing something like this. They're too under-resourced. They're too stupid. We got them under our control. We got them under our thumb, and we know the details of the attack. But it doesn't matter, again, if you don't do anything about them. So pretty clear stuff. And it's pretty interesting to see how that attack has really manifested in Israeli society since then. And the Zeteo organization, run by Mehdi Hassan, did a very interesting documentary about it. They have the trailer out now, and if there's any kind of Hebrew text that is subtitled, I'll just read over it, but I'm not sure if there is.
Here's a soldier saying that they've destroyed the university. There's no more education now in Gaza.
I think the education in Gaza was something you need to preserve.
People find it's humiliating,
Maybe humiliating. I don't.
Someone's home.
As I told you before, I don't see any problem with humiliating the Palestinians. There is nothing with humiliating.
There's a feeling of superiority. Day to day, I walk with the feeling of superiority over Gaza. Who wouldn't feel superior to them? And he kind of gives a little, cheeky little grin there with that little.
Since the war in Gaza started, Israeli soldiers on the front line have been broadcasting the devastation and their dehumanization of Palestinians on social media.
Actually, when I filmed it, my commander was very. They want me to do it.
That's the IDF soldiers who was just talking.
They didn't torture captives. You are lying. You are lying, and
that is the most Israeli woman ever.
Captive. They are
this is a video where Israeli French soldier put a video out.
Investigated
for torturing captives, and of course it'll all be handled. Again, shows you how much stock they put
extremists who were once
in an investigation.
Fringe are becoming more mainstream, emboldened by the rhetoric they hear.
Are you not concerned, Riot, that by blocking the aid going to Gaza, a lot of Palestinians who are already suffering are starving?
It's a wrong question, okay? Because the aid gets to Hamas.
The issue for Israel now goes well beyond the occupation.
How many do you think should die? Until there is no Hamas, this guy responds. If you need to kill 1 million, let it be 1 million.
It will always be the response of the West. We are exaggerating, but we are working. If we have genocidal thoughts.
Israel's real extremism. I don't think there should be life in Gaza on the day after. This is what this guy says. Honestly, I couldn't figure out who that was, but I'd be very interested to know. This was after, there was some dude quoting Hitler to say, Hitler had the right idea, curse his name, may his name die. But Hitler had the right idea when it comes to, you got to kill them all, essentially, with regards to the Palestinians. There's really some crazy, crazy stuff you never thought. Just like, don't leave any of them left. Like, how did that work out for Hitler? That is a really, really crazy, crazy thing to have. So, bottom line with Israel is Lebanon looks increasingly risky. There's an effort by Israel to kind of shift the focus away from Lebanon at this time, and it could very well be working. Some of they're setting the stages. They may pull out of Rafah in the recent future, or just pull their troops out of Rafah and continue to bomb the entire Gaza Strip, as they've continued to pretty horrifically do. Netanyahu is in kind of a weird spat and just alleging that Biden is holding up weapons that he does not seem to be holding up. And it seems Netanyahu essentially knew about October 7th, and the IDF knew about October 7th well ahead and did not act a lot on it. All right, so we are going to move on now to our next story. And before we do, we're going all in on immigration. But before we do, if you want some more fun episodes, if you want to see me kind of let my hair down a little bit, watch some fun videos, debate some fun people, have some just fun conversations, a little bit more Newsflash for you. If you genuinely think Newsflash is an improvement in your life, if you rely on me and the work that I do for some extra news, some extra information in your life, I say really from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. And I want your feedback. Of course, leave a comment, subscribe, but also become a supporter at the link in the description. Once we get a critical mass, we're going to start doing some more extra fun content like that. So please consider doing that. Thank you very much. But we do have some immigration to talk about, some big new protections for undocumented immigrants.
A few days ago, we marked the 12th anniversary of taking care of dreamers that President Obama and I put in place. There are a few of these immigration areas that have had most positive impact and gotten more support from the American people across the board. These young people known as dreamers, Hispanics, South Asians, and more, who came to America as children, only know America as their home, have been able to live and learn out of the shadow. So today I'm announcing new measures to clarify and speed up work visas to help people, including dreamers, who have graduated from U.S. colleges and universities, landed jobs in high-demand, high-skilled professions that we need to have grow to see our economy grow. It's the right thing to do. I'm announcing a common-sense fix to streamline the process for obtaining legal status for immigrants married to American citizens who lived here for a long time. Let's be clear. This action still requires undocumented spouses to file all required legal paperwork to remain in the United States. It requires them to pass a criminal background check. And it doesn't apply to anyone trying to come here today.
Yeah, so essentially it is what is, I think it's a very, very small relative policy. It's, people say it's the biggest in, many years, because there essentially hasn't been really anything done in many years. But Biden here is expanding and making it easier for essentially people who have been, the one partner in marriage comes to the U.S., gets the green card, then essentially brings the rest of the family over, and they have a kid in America. That kid is a citizen. The person was their green card or their permanent residence, whatever, or is a citizen themselves. They're good, but then there's just one illegal immigrant member of the family. And that is, even though these people are, and again, I think it's pretty clear to say, he is not doing that for any new arrival. So it represents kind of not too much of a big break from what has been his prevailing attitude this year through immigration, which we'll get to in a moment, which has been essentially Trump light. And it's had some pretty solid, strong effects. I think, the shutting down of asylum as we know it, shutting in the border when asylum gets to a certain point, much more money for ICE, not really doing anything to kind of rejuvenate the asylum courts, and essentially following the Trump policy on asylum kind of shows his broader attitude toward new arrivals. And, the future of immigration here is very, very much, very, very much hawkish, to say the least. So the Times says about this, New York Times, the new policy allows Mr. Biden to balance his recent crackdown on asylum with a sweeping pro-immigrant measure at, again, I wouldn't really call it necessarily sweeping, at a moment of political peril. With 5 months until the presidential election, Biden has been trying to curtail record numbers of illegal border crossings without alienating longtime supporters who have called for a more humane immigration system after the Trump years. So, again, I think this is a situation that is essentially trying to... It really does feel, again, Obama had this big moment, and here in the New York Times, they're comparing it to Obama. They're saying he's trying to replicate this Obama moment. It almost sounds so ridiculous because I think it's almost a more degenerated version of it, because with Obama, he didn't just completely kneecap the asylum system, in a way that he promised that he would not do when he was running just a few weeks ago, A. And B, even this, it just feels like he is totally, completely, following. He's got a big fat sail, and he's just getting blown really in whichever way the wind takes him. If he's getting a rightward push, oh, he's shutting down asylum as we know it in this country. Oh, he's getting a little backlash. Okay, now we can get some families to seek some spouses of legal immigrants. They can get who are illegal immigrants. They can get a pathway to citizenship easier. And so this policy is a very, very smart policy, because I think it does make the incredibly potent economic units that are these new kind of immigrant families that are revitalizing communities that have been really demographically sucked dry and doing jobs that literally keep our economy completely afloat. That is a very, very important good policy. But I think with Biden politically, it is clear he's just getting pushed whichever way the wind blows and not really appealing to anyone in the process, because people who are on his side were very much shaken, not just by Gaza, but by him essentially signing Trump's immigration policy into law. It'll be interesting to see how much this keeps through. But again, even if he's going for the more immigration hawkish kind of older, whiter voters in the middle of the country, he just completely blew that up in his face by doing this big policy for, in the New York Times words, I think this is kind of laughable, a sweeping new policy when it comes to helping dreamers and more primarily the spouses get pathway to citizenship more easily. 500,000 undocumented spouses will be shielded from deportation, given a pathway to citizenship and the ability to work legally. So again, how do you think your average Jim McCallahan from Wisconsin is going to feel about this policy? He was already voting for Trump anyway. He kind of scoffed at what Biden did in the first time, but now Biden is definitely not getting his support because, again, Trump is there, and it was stupid for him to even try anyway. But we have seen the majority, now that he's kind of desperately flailed back the other direction, we've seen the consequences, I would really say, of his rhetoric and his essentially, closing of the Overton window from a guy who was relatively, normal Democrat on immigration. He was not a fan of what Trump was doing. When he signed essentially that Trump asylum package into law, very, very proudly, or I think it was actually an executive order that he did, because Trump essentially pushed the Republicans to reject that law to keep it an election issue. And, we had got people like Al Sharpton calling immigrants invaders into the country, and essentially every single Democratic cultural media organ giving legitimacy to this, whole rhetoric of, migrant crisis coming in out of control, destroying our cities, et cetera, et cetera. That leads to headlines like we see in Newsweek. A recent poll found that a majority of Hispanic people favor mass deportation of undocumented immigrants living in the U.S. illegally. CBS News YouGov poll found that majority of registered voters, 62%, would favor the government starting a new national program to deport all undocumented immigrants currently living in the U.S. illegally. 38% said they would oppose it. The survey polled 1,615 registered voters, which had a margin of error of 3.8 points. So you have Hispanic voters who, they see themselves, unlike the liberal kind of commentary, they see themselves as, American citizens. They don't see themselves as essentially people who are supposed to care about immigration. But I think a lot of them were probably more Democrat than Republican. They see what's happening here. And they're like, okay, Biden's even admitting that we have a crisis. This must be really bad. We got to get him out of here. This is what happens when we have a continued both sides making the case for complete immigration hawkishness. So really interesting stuff. With Hispanics, it was 53%. I think it was white people were more supportive for mass deportations. What a surprise. 67% say they would support it. So among black people, it was 47% in favor and 53% opposed. An Axios poll published in April found also that the majority of Americans support mass deportation of undocumented immigrants, including 45% of Latinos. The results in the latest survey indicate that many would back President Trump's plan to launch the largest deportation operation in U.S. history if he wins back White House in November. I think it's going to be a much, I think Thomas Gift, who they quote here in the news because pretty much has it right on, a much smaller portion of Americans who purport to favor mass deportation of undocumented immigrants would support what it would practically entail. He says he's associate professor of political science and director of the Center on U.S. Politics at UCL. So shout out to UCL. But showing papers on demand, racial profiling, a huge increase in the number and scale of ICE raids. But the polling is reflective of how dissatisfied American voters are. The failure of both Republicans and Democrats to secure the border. Immigration is surging to one of the most important issues because Washington has shown itself completely ill-equipped to execute common sense immigration enforcement, or really solve the problem here. This is how it went down on CBS, the makers of the poll, when it first came out.
Would deport all people living in the U.S. illegally. And that finds majority favor. That finds 6 and 10. It's strongest among folks who are MAGA. It's strongest among Trump supporters, but also from some Democrats as well. And I think that speaks to the general idea, not just that people see the border as a crisis, but also where we are in the campaign, where a lot of very dramatic or new proposals out there are finding favor here.
So unpack that a bit, because this 62% of Americans favor deporting all undocumented immigrants. So Homeland Security says that President Biden has already deported or repatriated more people in the past year than any year since 2010. And then, depending on the details of what's talked about on the campaign trail, some of what Mr. Trump talks about could be illegal. It doesn't seem practical in some sense to round up children. And then we know that the courts have questioned whether local authorities would have the ability to do it, and federal authorities don't have the resources. So what exactly do people think they're supporting?
I think, that is honestly a pretty fair question there. It was like, on Fox News, to make fun of it. This was where I got the article from. But it is a pretty fair, what people, I think, really do not know. It is a very, very incredibly costly policy. And I think the big thing, both these articles here in Newsweek and Fox News, they do not mention that the economy, if all undocumented immigrants were to, just disappear, overnight or relatively quickly, the economy would absolutely go into a free fall. Like some of the most important sectors, prices would skyrocket. If this were to happen, is completely, and again, it does represent a problem that so much of our, poorest labor is just being done by exploited undocumented immigrants. But the way to fix that is not to just shut off the spigot entirely overnight so things just absolutely skyrocket. And it's also, something that is squarely Joe Biden's bet to make when we see this massive shift, because, again, it is one of the just at least I thought, was one of the most basic rules in politics, is just not completely give into your opponent's framing on the issue. And is what is, Joe Biden has done completely. He hasn't been as rhetorically harsh, and again, that's what a lot of the the really hardline immigration people don't want. They want the tough rhetoric. They want the speeches like Trump gives, but they don't necessarily want as much of the action, because they know it, or they don't know, but they they don't want the action because when they see it happen, it's just not going to be something that allows them to live a comfortable life. They're going to have to pay more. Is probably the biggest thing for basic things. Construction costs also starting to skyrocket. All in many sectors. There's think about how many chefs and cooks across the country in various restaurants don't have the best immigration status. This is all very well documented information, and it's pretty much. Ron DeSantis tried to do it something similar in Florida, and he could only do it for about a week before he had to backtrack on the policy because immigrant labor is such a big deal, and the reason that we've got the reason why we got to that case, I would say, is, and the way people are feeling the way that they are, is Joe Biden's inability to make a counter argument, to imagine a world where, okay, we are actually providing more legal pathways to citizenship. We are actually reducing, some of the stressors on those countries, which that actually has been a bit of an improvement. But, some of the Central American countries have definitely improved in terms of crime. But we are not doing it in any way a better job of actually dealing with the system and actually taking ways to more safely imbibe these immigrants into our country and to keep track of them, for a certain period of time. It's not something that's that complicated. There's no argument that's being made, though. So the only voice in the room is just yelling for deportations, which, not to mention, would be a really horrifically amoral, cruel, awful policy. It would also send our economy into absolute destruction. Pretty controlled demolition territory right there for the economy if that were to go to pass. So again, egg on Joe Biden's face, but also some complete lunacy from the policy of national mass deportations that people seem to be supporting. And again, that is largely the reason why Joe Biden has egg on his face, because he's embraced these policies to such a degree, and this rhetoric as well. I pretty much accepted it that we are going long today, so we're going to our last story at the moment. It's a pretty good one. This is all Wisconsin. They have probably one of the most important states. This is a state that Joe Biden could lose, again, Nevada, Georgia, Arizona, all the way down the line. Those key 3 Sunbelt states that made his win much more convincing than Hillary's last time around. He could lose those all. And he would just have to win Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan to keep his head above the water. Hillary losing Pennsylvania was what set her over the edge. Biden winning Pennsylvania was what set him over the edge, interestingly enough. But Wisconsin is going to be a pretty big state in that whole equation. Financial Times has a big article about it, taking you essentially inside the Republican Party's efforts to hold Wisconsin. I can preach to you that anxiety is great among Republicans, said Jerry Helmer, the chair of Sauk County Republican Party, the heart of the swing state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin, the smallest of the blue wall of kind of traditional Democratic supporting states surrounding the Great Lake that could decide the U.S. election, has a heavy share of older, white, blue-collar industrial workers whose allegiance swings back and forth in elections. And Trump and Biden are neck and neck in the race to win them over. And this is, again, really important stuff. For the election, election prediction, this is the most important story of the whole show. And this is why it's always kind of fun here to go in and read the tea leaves. So let's get into this article. So the state's political fate will ultimately rest on whether Biden can win over as many voters in the cities of Milwaukee and Madison, which are traditionally Democratic strongholds, while making inroads in the traditionally conservative, college-educated Republican suburbs. So pretty much in Wisconsin, right, you pull out the kind of the visual maps, kind of a big state that looks like a mitten almost. I know people say Michigan looks like a mitten, but also Wisconsin almost does as well. But kind of almost where the base of the palm is, we have Madison and we have Milwaukee. They're almost kind of back and forth. Madison is where the big University of Wisconsin-Madison, big university there, that essentially makes it Democratic. They're going to need to run up the numbers there in Madison, where you got the biggest Democratic constituency, just kind of young college kids, and then you got the black vote in Milwaukee, which is going to be a big, big deal as well. And those numbers are going to be, Biden faces a pretty uphill battle there, as you can imagine, with what we've been talking about with regards to Israel and his consistent dropping in the black vote for a variety of reasons. So he's going to have to run up those numbers in Milwaukee. And same thing, with Detroit in Michigan. It's a very, very similar story. And Sauk County, though, is kind of going to be one of those middle parts where he is going to want to kind of eat in to the wealthier. Again, there's a lot of different old white people in this country. There's the kind of the wealthier, more suburban people who are more concerned about the extremist elements of the Republican Party, more concerned about protecting abortion, more concerned about saving democracy. And then you have Sauk County, which is a 66,000 residents reliant on a mix of agriculture, tourism, and manufacturing. It's a key political bellwether for the state and one of two counties in Wisconsin that flipped back and forth in the last two elections. This is a largely white elderly crowd. This is a concert at the main square of Baraboo, which is Sauk's biggest city. Steve Novak, a retired accountant, said, "I consider myself an independent, but the Republican Party has gone way to the right, and I can't stand Trump." There you go. That's what I'm talking about with these suburban counties. Sauk County is actually just to the north of Madison, so you got a lot of people kind of commuting into the city. A lot of people just kind of have a little bit more kind of income. This is somebody who is a kind of retired accountant. He's made a pretty good amount of money in his life. You definitely got some more farmers who are definitely more kind of the heart of the Trump coalition there. And also some union workers as well that have kind of been a bellwether up north, which is a whole different thing. But this is the kind of vote that Biden has to win the state, that he won easily in 2020. I'm not even going to look, but I bet you he voted Biden. Novak is unsure whether he will vote Biden again. Of the people I know, it's about 50-50. Or he's unsure, whether Biden will win. Of the people I know, it's about 50-50. I really think the economy is starting to turn, and I don't think Biden gets enough credit for it. But it's going to be a hard sell because a lot of people go to the grocery store, and I just think it's not working. Yeah, a lot of people do go to the grocery store. That is a big knock there for Biden. Suzanne Kovalovsky, another Biden supporter, said, "I'd like to think that people are smarter than falling for Trump again, but they fell for it before. Republicans believe a wave of dissatisfaction over high inflation as well as fear of immigration on the southern border," which, again, Biden plays into. I can't hammer that home enough. Will be enough to tip the state in favor of Trump yet again. I'm hoping that people have had enough of the rising prices. Everything in the dollar stores now is not even $1 anymore. Now it's a $1.25 Biden special, says Mike Toomey, a 64-year-old circus performer and construction worker wearing a brown Trump cap. Many, quote, blue-collar people believe simply that Trump is looking out for them a little more, he added. Democrats counter that Trump is a phony populist, and they believe that Biden's record of championing policies that benefit the economy, including sweeping manufacturing and infrastructure subsidies, are finally starting to resonate. In Sauk County, the inflation rate is 2.7%, far below the national average, which is a pretty big deal. So here you see, between that accountant and the former circus performer and construction worker, you see the two different sides. You see someone who's going to be much more impacted by inflation, probably less likely to own, even working class, less likely to own a home. If you're younger, by the way, you're less likely to own a home. The rental inflation is going to influence you a lot more. And I don't know. I think he's definitely not younger, but he's definitely, it says in this, and you can tell by his job, he's a pretty working class guy. These are people who are much more likely to skew to Trump, which is kind of a big flip on how things have previously been, with a lot more people, on the working class side, especially in Wisconsin, tending to go Democrat. If you want a job here, you can get a job. No one is working for minimum wage anymore, says Susan Nower, Democratic Party chair in Sauk County, speaking at a cafe in Baraboo. Improvements to Route 33 funded by Biden's infrastructure bill have been a big gain for the community, she added. The key thing here is the double haters, voters who are unhappy with Trump but also unwilling to support the incumbent president. They're a big risk for Biden, and those double haters, which way they go is going to be the way to determine how which way the presidency goes. Not only do local residents complain about high prices generally, but the cost of housing and childcare in particular. There you go. And this is, again, in mortgages with the interest rates staying high and with massive amounts of rental inflation. Neither candidate is worth voting for, said Edward Whitsack, a 50-year-old candidate, a father of 8 in the town of Sauk City, who's voted both Democratic and Republican presidents in the past, but did not vote in 2020. "I can't vote for the worst of two evils, and that's what we have again." Nowhere is dismayed that the race is so tight. Who's going to vote for him that didn't vote for him last time? Trump, is an absolute horrible danger. It's hard for me to reconcile that he's even in the universe in polling, and how we could be even remotely close. But how many Republicans are gearing up for a contest that is expected to go down to the wire? A hint of how they're approaching the election can be seen in another sign at local party headquarters, which displays so-called seventh rule of a gunfight. It read, in 10 years, nobody will remember who lived. In 10 years, nobody will remember the details of the caliber, stance, or the tactics. They will only remember who lived. So, amen to that. So many different interesting kind of coalitions at play there in Wisconsin. You got the kind of more suburban voters like that accountant, kind of upper middle class, richer voters who are just like, things are going pretty well. But then that big kind of coalition of the downwardly mobile white working class that Biden was able to kind of wrest a little bit back from, but he mostly made inroads by turning out high in the cities and winning over people like that accountant guy who had been independent but had been really turned off by Trump. And there's a lot of people like that, especially in places like Wisconsin, in particular, less so in Michigan, but also in Pennsylvania in a big way as well. So we continue trying follow these looks into state stories for you and bring them to you because they're very, very important to understanding the election and why if enough people, this is the kind of way I'm kind of feeling now, if enough people like that accountant guy actually remember to go to the polls and enough youths get scared by Trump before the election, then Biden has this thing in the bag, especially in those top three, northern states. And that will, of course, portend to him winning the whole thing. But if not, then it's Trump's. So it's going to be very interesting to keep an eye on as things roll on. That's all we got for you guys today. Apologize for the longer show. We'll be back with a much shorter show tomorrow.